we've been talking about heuristics and the biases that emerge from heuristics. There are a few other biases that we will talk about today in this lecture. In particular, we will talk about overconfidence, we'll talk about exponential growth bias, and a few other biases. So let's start with overconfidence. Overconfidence, also known as the mother of all biases by some accounts, is a cognitive bias where a person's judgment is reliably better than the objective accuracy of such judgments. In fact, Thaler calls overconfidence as the most robust finding in the psychology of judgment. So think about it. What could be some of the consequences of overconfidence? In fact, the consequences are not trivial. Wars have been fought because of the overconfidence of the political leaders. Stock market bubbles are created because of the investor overconfidence. Strikes are often conducted by workers because of overconfidence. Unnecessary lawsuits emerge. Entrepreneurial bankruptcies are created. Accidents such as Challenger or Chernobyl have been traced in different measures to the overconfidence of those who were managing these environments. So overconfidence has a very non-trivial role to play in human behavior. But there are different kinds of overconfidence. In particular, in this course, we'll look at three different forms of overconfidence. We'll look at overprecision. What do we mean by overprecision? Overprecision answers the question, are we too sure about the judgments? Next, we'll talk about overestimation. What do we mean by that? Are we better, smarter, more attractive than we actually are? And finally, we'll also talk about overplacement. And that asks the question, are we better, smarter, more attractive than others? Let's start with overprecision. In a very interesting study, Alpert and Raifa, they asked participants to write down their best estimate of certain figures. In addition, they asked them to put a lower and upper bound around the estimates so that the participant is about 98% confident that that range or that bound surrounds the actual quantity. What do we mean by that? Let's take the first variable that you see on the list, Walmart's 2010's revenue. So participants are asked to report what their estimate of Walmart's 2010 revenue is, and they are asked to report the 98% confidence band which they think will include the true number. Right? Now, interestingly, these are all variables which people don't have a very good sense of. For example, Google's 2010 revenue or the world population in January 2012. These are not numbers that people readily keep track of, right? But they have been asked to report their guess, that it's their estimate, and also give a confidence band which they're 98% sure will include the true number. As you can see, they ask people to make the range wide enough such that there is a 98% chance the truth will lie inside it. And these are the true numbers for you to take a look at. There were about 100 participants, and each participant were making 10 such choices. The interesting finding in this study is most people bound between 3 and 7 of these quantities. However, they were 98% confident that each of these ranges will surround the true value. In other words, they're proposing a guess, they're proposing an estimate, but the confidence band that they are offering, and this confidence band is associated with their perception that the true quantity will lie within that band 98% of the times, that band does not include the true quantity for majority of these quantities. In other words, people are overconfident in the sense that they are overconfident about how accurate their knowledge is. Now, there could be an confound here, confound in the sense there could be, this could result from unfamiliarity of these variables. One doesn't really keep track of world's population in the year 2012, right? So, a related study by McKinsey and others, they include students and computer programmers in UCSD and ask students question about UCSD campus and also about the IT industry. They ask computer programmers questions about UCSD campus and the IT industry. As you can easily guess, students are experts in UCSD campus, but computer programmers are more familiar with the IT industry. So here, through this experiment, they could show whether confidence, precision or over-precision vanishes in environments where people are more familiar with the context. And what do they find? They find that overconfidence in the form of over-precision remains. The confidence band is so narrow that it does not include the true number most often. However, in the context of familiarity, there is a reduction in the amount of over-precision. In other words, over-precision in the form that was measured in the previous study by Alpert and Reifa had little bit to do with familiarity, but familiarity does not explain away over-precision completely. So, here are some more illustrations. Ben David and others, they published a paper in Quarterly Journal of Economics in the year 2013, where they asked business leaders, what do you expect will be the stock market return probability? In addition, they ask, give your 80% confidence band that will include the true stock market return. And this question was asked to several business executives, about more than 13,000 of them. A 10-year panel data was created. And what do they find? They found that the realized returns are within the 80% confidence band of the executives only 36% of the times. In other words, for the remaining 64% of the times, the reported confidence band, the reported 80% confidence band does not include the true return probability. And this miscalibration, as they put it, as the authors put it, is worst during the times of high market uncertainty. In addition, miscalibration about the stock market predicted the miscalibration about the performance in their own firms. So as a result, over-precision in the form of miscalibration had a non-trivial effect on their perception about how their own firm was doing. Here are some more real-life instances. Suppose you are the chief legal counsel of a firm and you have to decide whether to go for litigation or you should do an out-of-court settlement. If you are 98% confident about a win, then what would be your advice? Your advice will be to go for litigation. Suppose here is another instance. You develop a marketing plan for a product based on the forecast of future sales. Suppose you are extremely confident about your plan, that your plan will work. You are unlikely to develop a plan B. So you can see confidence in the form of precision of belief has a very important real life implication, has several important real life implications. I encourage you to think more about it. Given that we know that there exists over-precision, how do we correct for it? Herzog and Hartwig in 2009 asked people to come up with not one but more than one estimates of the exact same outcome. An average of the estimates they found produced a more accurate final judgments. What was the key takeaway then? The key takeaway was very similar to what we in popular language call as the wisdom of the crowds. And one version of wisdom of the crowd can be found in the phrase crowd within oneself. What does that mean? Well, the experiment with Herzog and Hartwig did was actually probing people to think about multiple outcomes or multiple estimates. So in some sense, there is a crowd that they were trying to generate within an individual. This brings us to the key takeaway in more application-oriented terms. It's always useful to hear the perspectives from others. And this can be very informative, and it can give a much more wider sense of where the truth lies and help prevent over-precision. Here is a second strategy to correct for over-precision, as Haran and others show. They asked people to explicitly consider the chances of alternative outcomes to the one they proposed. For instance, they asked people, what do you think is the chance of success? Let's say the participant would say 98%. They would then ask another question. What do you think is the percentage chance of failure? The explicit demand for the percentage chance of failure would induce people to recalibrate their perception, recalibrate their judgment. And in this process, the accuracy of the judgments would improve.